Supported by 3FM 92.7 Accra.
Hello and welcome to Hot Issues, and today we are doing a two-part interview. The first part of the interview would be with Madame Fatou Bensouda, Chief Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court. And then we shall have Mr. Kofi Abotsi, Dean of the Faculty of Law at the GIMPA School of Law. And we are looking generally at the ICC. We are looking at the controversy surrounding its dispute with the African Union. We are looking at its own statutes, and we are looking at how the UN's work impinges on the work of the ICC. Welcome to Hot Issues. Hello and welcome to Hot Issues. And as I indicated before, we are taking a look at the International Criminal Court. And we want to find out what the Chief Prosecutor of the court is doing in Accra. What is the mandate of the court? What are some of the difficulties that it is having? How does the decision by the AU to pull out of the court affect the work of the court and so on? And we are particularly privileged to have with us one of the 100 most influential Africans, the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Madame Fatou Bensouda. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Madame,
it's easier actually, it's just Fatou.
Fatou, okay. Madame, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
What brings you to Accra?
I was invited by GIMPA for this very important conference that they are holding, the Faculty of Law is holding on ICC and Africa. And it is an opportunity really to raise awareness of really what the ICC is all about, what is it doing, what is the mandate of the ICC, what is the membership of the ICC, what kind of court is it, what crimes can the ICC try, and also all other explanations which really will go towards making people understand more the court, because I know that a lot of the misperception that is created about the ICC is due to misinformation or lack of understanding what really this important institution, what role it has come to play in the international criminal legal order.
So what really is the ICC about?
The ICC was set up, it was established in 1998 in Rome upon the signing of the Rome Statute. It's called the Rome Statute because, of course, it took place in Rome. And the Rome Statute is the statute that establishes the International Criminal Court. The court came into existence after 60 ratifications, which happened in 2002 in July. And if you look at the history of signature of international treaties, you will see that it's one of the fastest that was able to come into existence in just 4 years. And today the ICC can boast of a membership of 124 states who have signed and ratified the Rome Statute. I just want to remind that the ICC is not a UN court. It was not created by the UN. It is an independent institution and it is treaty-based. States have voluntarily signed and ratified the Rome Statute, bringing it into existence. The mandate that has been given to the ICC by the states parties is to have jurisdiction over war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And we can only try these cases, I mean these crimes, when they happen after 2002, when the court came into existence. Anything before, the ICC is not able to look into. And the ICC, in this jurisdiction that it will exercise, it can only do so on the territory of state parties, or over nationals of state parties, wherever they may commit these crimes. And we don't have jurisdiction, of course, over non-state parties because they are not part of the ICC. But where the UN Security Council is able to refer a situation of a non-state party to the ICC, we could have jurisdiction after we have already make sure that all the analysis that we need to do, as in any case we've done, because this referral by the UN Security Council is also not automatic. We have to check whether our jurisdiction is met in terms of crimes, in terms of subject matter, in terms of temporal scope, and all that before we come to a decision to accept a UN Security Council referral or not.
If the ICC truly is a treaty-based organization, why does the UN Security Council have, authority of referral and deferral?
Yes. The thinking behind that, I can tell you, was very noble, or very, very important. The thinking behind having UN Security Council to refer situations to the ICC. Because, of course, as it is being seen now, not every country, every government have decided to sign and ratify the Rome Statute. So there will be instances, therefore, when these crimes happen in a territory of a non-state party, the ICC would not be able to do anything because it doesn't have jurisdiction there, territorial jurisdiction. But then you have the UN Security Council as the ultimate body responsible for security worldwide, to be able to say, using the statute, it's in the statute, that this situation is going to be referred to the ICC. Because the UN Security Council could, as they have done in Rwanda, establish a court. They can also decide that maybe this matter should be given to a court that is already established, is independent, and it can look into this situation. This was the thinking behind having the UN Security Council having the power to be able to refer situations to the ICC.
But are we cognizant of the fact that the UN Security Council itself is a very undemocratic organization?
Yes. The UN Security Council is, of course, a political body. It is a political body, and we all know that. But the ICC is not a political body. The ICC, however, acts in most situations that we intervene. It's a volatile political situation. You know, the circumstances are all political. But the ICC have to remain an independent judicial institution. And by that I mean, and I tried to explain it earlier when you said that the UN Security Council can refer cases to the ICC. The UN Security Council can refer cases to the ICC, but the considerations that we will have as a court to take that referral is completely legal. It's completely based on the evidence. It's completely based on an impartial assessment of the situation, whether we take the case or we do not take the case. Just like Libya was referred, we did our assessment and went on with the case. Sudan was referred, we did our own assessment and went on with the case. There could possibly a situation in which the UN Security Council could refer a case to the ICC, and we'll look at it and we'll say that we do not believe that all our jurisdictional matters have been met, requirements have been met, and unfortunately we are not able to take the case. This is a possibility, just to draw emphasis on the independence that the court has. We do not go to the UN Security Council to say give us case X or case Y, but they have the power to do that. That does not stop us to make our judicial, independent, impartial assessment before taking the case.
So far, has there been any case where there has been a referral from the UN Security Council that you have not acted on?
So far, UN has only referred 2 cases to the ICC, and not anymore. And those two cases were Sudan and Darfur, Sudan, and Libya. And in these 2 instances, as I have said before, the independent assessment that we would normally do if the state were to refer a case to the ICC was done, and a decision was taken by my predecessor, my office, to decide to engage in Darfur and also to engage in Libya. But after those 2 referrals, we have not had any from the UN Security Council. There has been attempts, various attempts by various states to have the UN Security Council refer other situations to the ICC. But this, of course, has not yet taken place.
What about the morality, if you like, the legal morality of having a body like the UN Security Council have such powers when it has 5 permanent members with veto powers and 3 out of the 5 are not subject to the Rome Treaty? Where is the morality in that one?
I believe, as I said, the intentions at the very beginning for having the UN Security Council to be able to refer situations, the reasoning behind, the logic behind was a good one, I believe. Good one in the sense that they will try to ensure that even where a state does not ratify the Rome Statute and commit these crimes, it cannot go unchecked. It will be looked at. This was the reason behind, and I think, as I said, it's a good reasoning. How the UN Security Council acts as a political body, of course, the ICC has no say over that. We have no say over the decisions that they take to refer one case or another. We also do not go to the UN Security Council and say, you have to give us this case. And it brings me back to what I was earlier on saying, that what will render the ICC credible in this process is to ensure that when we are acting strictly based on the legal criteria, the legal requirements, that definitely it's fully justified for the ICC to look into this situation based, as I said, on the fact that our crimes have been committed and that we should intervene in that situation. All the jurisdictional requirements are met. And this is what the court, the office, my office, which receives these referrals, this is what we will continue to be guided by. Our complete independence and impartiality in looking at these dossiers, whether it's coming from a state party or whether it's coming from the UN Security Council.
I listened to you when you delivered your keynote address, and you virtually proclaimed an end to impunity with the coming of the ICC.
Yes.
Is that true?
Well, I mean, you have to first of all look at ICC. It's a very young institution, very young institution. It's still, I could say, it's in its infancy, and it has already made, I believe, established itself as quite a player in the international criminal justice fora. We have I think, shown ourselves to be quite relevant. What the intention was in creating the ICC, as you know, is to end impunity for these atrocity crimes. And ending impunity for these atrocity crimes is something that there has to be players both at the international level and at the national level. Because an ideal situation in the first instance is that national jurisdictions, domestic jurisdictions, are taking up their responsibility, because that responsibility is theirs to investigate and prosecute these crimes. Primarily, is for national jurisdictions to do that. And ICC comes in to complement. ICC does not replace national jurisdictions. It only complements it, especially when the national jurisdiction is unable, due to capacity, or unwilling, maybe due to political will, to investigate and prosecute these crimes. But the idea of establishing the ICC really was impunity must end. People who perpetrate these serious, heinous crimes must be brought to account. There must be accountability, and there must be justice for the victims of these serious, very serious crimes. And you will recall that we're saying that these are crimes so serious that they shock the conscience of humanity. We have seen in various conflicts what is going on. We have seen that really the victims bear the brunt of this case, of this conflict. So this is the idea behind creating the ICC. The ICC, I mean, as I told you, is 124 states. 34 out of those states are part of the African states are part of the ICC. And I believe we should continue in that momentum. Those who suffer these crimes look to us to bring justice to them.
It has been said that a vast majority of cases being handled by the ICC are African cases. How come?
That is true. The vast majority is African cases. And it is important to, I keep telling everyone, even this morning, if you listen, I did say that it is important to also look into how did these cases come to the ICC. Is it ICC that is deliberately going to Africa in all these situations, in conflicts, and I'm sure you will not disagree that there are conflicts, that is it the ICC who's just going one conflict after another and say, I'm taking this case to the ICC, or what is the true story? And I really rely on journalists, the media, to bring out the true story of ICC, especially ICC in Africa. The true story, by just doing a little bit of research and knowing how come the cases are in ICC African cases, is because the majority of them took it to the ICC. The majority of all these cases, and I've mentioned them several times. It started since 2003, 2004 with Uganda, referring a case to the ICC, their situation. Then it was followed by Democratic Republic of Congo also. Then it was followed by Central African Republic. We've seen recently the Cote d'Ivoire was also referred by Cote d'Ivoire to the ICC. And lastly, Mali. They all have referred situations to the ICC asking for ICC's intervention because they are state parties. And these crimes have happened on their soil, and they're saying that we are not in a position to do it. Therefore, ICC, which I am part of, please come in and investigate and prosecute these crimes. And this is exactly what we are doing. Of course, after these cases are referred to them, our independence does not require that they will tell us, investigate this person or that person or this person. We have to do that independently. And that's what we have been doing. This can never be dictated to us. It has not been dictated to us. So we investigate in those situations. This is why the court was created. If you are part of the ICC, you cannot take up this responsibility. Then you can refer to an institution that you are part of. So that is part of the explanation of why most of the cases are there. But the story doesn't stop there. We go back to the UN Security Council. The two cases, Libya and Darfur, were referrals by the UN Security Council to the ICC. I believe the only case that, as prosecutor, ICC prosecutor can use own powers to start a case is the Kenya situation alone. And this is after several attempts and encouragement to Kenya to do their own case. Because as I told you in the beginning, if the country is doing it, ICC will not. But if you are not, that impunity that you have asked me, that is what we are saying no. No more impunity. You either do it or ICC will do it. If you don't do it, ICC will come in if you are a state party. This is what states have actually signed on to. And
next question. Is impunity not a global phenomenon?
Mm-hmm. It is indeed a global phenomenon. I mean,
so how come that we don't see that global character reflected in the work of the ICC?
In fact, I should have answered in my last question about that, because the whole story of ICC is just not ICC in Africa. And that is another true story I hope will come out. Because those who are interested in looking at ICC as a court by the West against the Africa or a neo-colonial, with no basis for saying that. If you look at currently what we have before us, ICC is already a long time ago outside of Africa and looking into other actors and other people who potentially could be accused of committing these crimes. In Afghanistan, we are looking at actions of all the actors in Afghanistan. We are looking at that because Afghanistan has been under preliminary examination by the ICC for some time now. Colombia ICC has actually played a very constructive role so far in our preliminary examinations. And even though currently we see that there is an agreement being made, the authorities are constantly saying that the ICC crimes will also be looked into. So that's justice, because what we are concerned about is justice, not the politics of what is going on, but to ensure that the ICC crimes, where they occur, they are addressed. We are also in Ukraine. Ukraine is another situation that we have been looking at. Ukraine it's not a state party to the Rome Statute, but it accepted the jurisdiction of the ICC to be looked for the crimes that occurred there to be looked into. All those situations are outside of Africa. Palestine is the most recent one, where my office has decided to open preliminary examinations into the situation in Palestine, after Palestine accepted ICC's jurisdiction and went further to ratify the Rome Statute, because these were some of the issues perhaps affecting ICC to be able to exercise jurisdiction. I have also opened preliminary examinations or reopened preliminary examinations in the situation in Iraq, but only over the UK forces and the allegations of detainee abuse that took place in Iraq during the conflict. I emphasized over the UK forces because it has to be understood that Iraq is not a state party. Therefore, we cannot look at crimes that took place in Iraq as such. But since I also informed you earlier that we can look at conduct of nationals of state parties, if there are allegations of any of the crimes of ICC, we can look at that. That's why it's narrow. We are only looking at the conduct of UK forces in Iraq about the allegations of detainee abuse that is alleged to have taken place there. So it is not just in Africa that ICC is working, but of course those who have interest in saying so and those who unfortunately don't know will continue to say that ICC is only working in Africa, when in reality this is not the situation, this is not the case.
Madam, can we take a closer look at Afghanistan?
Yes.
The key player in Afghanistan
Yes.
is the United States
Yes.
of America.
Yes.
It is not a signatory to the Rome Statute, and it has signed impunity agreements with more than 120 countries. It's also sitting on the UN Security Council, which has powers of referral and deferral. Are you sure that given this mix of your reality, you can bring the United States of America to book?
Firstly, it is ICC, of course, is we look at conduct of individual criminal responsibility. We don't bring states. States don't come before the ICC. That's the work
the
of another
President of the
body.
United States. He
What?
gave the orders in Afghanistan.
Okay.
He attacked Iraq
Yes.
on a flimsy, baseless excuse.
Well,
2 million people are dead in these wars. What can be greater impunity than this?
what I can tell you is, first, of course, we do have this problem of lack of territorial jurisdiction. And this must be recognized. We cannot just go to places that have not signed and ratified the Rome Statute. But we can go to places that have signed and ratified the Rome Statute and have committed acts, crimes that fall within ICC's jurisdiction, allegedly, on that territory. We can use that. If you see, I gave you the example of Afghanistan earlier on, is because, as you rightly said, the US and other international forces were players in that conflict. ICC's jurisdiction, I have the mandate to look at that conduct. And we are looking at the conduct. It's still under preliminary examination. No, it should not be assumed
the
that
question
just...
is, do you have the power to look at that conduct? Because your investigations can be blocked by the UN Security Council. There are powers of deferral. I
have powers of deferral that comes later, and I don't want to engage in that discussion. What I can tell you as an office, what we are doing is that Afghanistan is under preliminary examinations. We have been collecting information with a view to make a determination as to where to take the case further, to make a determination at the end of the preliminary examinations on whether to move to investigations or not. That is where we are. And in this process, as I told you, we are looking at conduct of everybody that is involved in that conflict. We have to. This is our mandate. It's not a question of this power is in the Security Council or not. The UK is in the Security Council. Already I've opened preliminary examinations to look at their conduct in Iraq, because that's the limited way in which I can go. Nationals of state parties alleged to have committed crimes. In Afghanistan, is a similar situation. I will look at conduct.
Are you not hampered you probably would want to do an honest job, insist on the independence of the ICC.
It's not probably. I want to do an honest
Are
job.
you not hampered by the whole international architecture that has a bearing on the ICC's work?
No,
all this veto power, powers of referral, powers of deferral, and so on, don't they constitute a block on the striving to be independent and so on? That's the question.
Exactly. I mean, it's really all speculation, and I do not want to continue to just keep insisting that my work, I do have jurisdiction over nationals of state parties or on the territory of state parties. If you look at today, for example, Georgia, I have just concluded my preliminary examinations in Georgia, and I went to the chamber and requested for authorization to open investigations into the situation in Georgia of 2008. And the chamber has just granted me that authorization, which means that I'm looking at conduct not only of Georgians or South Ossetians, but also conduct of Russians in that, and Russians are not state party to the Rome Statute, and they are also part of the UN Security Council. So I don't think we need to continue to use these speculations, because where my jurisdictional parameters are met, where it is met, I will not hesitate, wherever it may be, to open investigations into that situation.
It's interesting that you describe this as speculation. How is it speculation? The powers of the UN Security Council are real, tangible powers. It's not speculation.
I
the
agree.
fact of the
I'm
United
talking
States
about speculations in terms of what the ICC can or cannot do if the situation were to present itself. That is speculation.
But it's a matter of law. It's not a matter of speculation.
But that law
it's a
also,
matter of statute. It's a matter of international law.
The same law that gives them that power of veto also gives me power to be able to look at conduct on the territory of state parties, even over nationals who are not state parties. That law gives me the power to do that. The fact that they have conducted it on the territory of a state party, whether they are state parties, nationals or not, under the Rome Statute, I also have the power to look at that conduct.
Now, Madam, the African Union has taken a very interesting decision, which more or less says that African countries can pull out of the Rome Statute. How would this affect your work?
For me, I prefer to really look at it as, what does this do for our continent? Because the ICC is there. It's a permanent institution, and we are working. First of all, let us also look at the reality. If it would affect our work in such a way that we will not be able to conduct, even currently what we are doing, is a serious problem, because ICC, we depend on cooperation with states. But I can tell you that in reality, the individual African states are still supporting the work of the court. Just recently, I've done 2 major missions to Africa to seek for support in some of our investigations, and I was very well received, and my people are already on the ground in those countries investigating. So the reality is that individual African countries are still cooperating with my work, and it is not affecting the work that I am concretely doing on the ground. But speaking as an African, I really think that this is something that, even though if you really look at the wording, it talks about roadmap to withdrawing to, so it's not actually saying they will withdraw tomorrow, they will draw a roadmap. But for me as an African, and I'm not speaking as the prosecutor of the ICC, I really see this as a regression for the continent. We have done so much to really ensure there is rule of law, there is impunity. Pulling out of the ICC without especially having any mechanism in place to ensure that the victims of these crimes have justice, to ensure there is no impunity anymore, to ensure that those who perpetrate these crimes are brought to account, and we say that the only mechanism that we have in place, we pull out of it. I believe that this is really taking us steps back and not a progress for the continent, and we should think about it carefully.
Are you aware that the Parliament of Namibia has actually voted to empower the government to leave?
Yeah. I have read it somewhere, but also I always say that becoming part of the ICC or not becoming part of the ICC is an independent prerogative of the government. Really, it's a sovereign decision that any government takes to join an institution or to leave the institution. And, but all what I can say is to encourage those states who are thinking about it, that they either ensure that there is really a good alternative in place to ensure that there will be rule of law in their country, there will not be impunity, there will be accountability, that they have that in place instead of pulling out and have nothing in place to ensure that these crimes are addressed.
Now, Madam, what can be greater impunity than governments sitting 6,000 miles outside Africa, deciding to remove democratically elected governments in Africa by force, creating wars and allowing people to die? What can be greater impunity than that?
For me, as you know, this is...
I'm talking about the concept of regime change.
Yes. I mean, this is definitely, for me, does not fall within the mandate of the ICC.
When it leads to massacres, when it leads to genocide, when it leads to...
Well, when it leads to genocide, if it falls within the temporal scope of the ICC or it leads to crimes against humanity, that is what we look at. That is what we look at, and that is what we try to address. Crimes. It's not a political institution, and one of the things that the court suffers from is the politicization. That everything, every step that we take is because of this political reason or the other. This is not the situation with ICC. We are a component. We are part of a bigger process, but we cannot, for example, be responsible of every human rights abuse of everywhere. Ours concretely deals with crimes. If the crimes take place, if they are committed, then we have jurisdiction there, we will look at it. If we don't, things like regime change is not part of our mandate to look at unless it amounts to one of our crimes.
Madam, thank you very much.
Thank you
very much for coming.
Thank you.
Well, viewers, you've heard her, and she is one of the 100 most influential Africans, and she's the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, dealing with very complex issues, the very complex issues that we've discussed here today. We've done the first part of the interview with the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, and we'd like to see if we can develop some other perspectives. And it is my privilege to welcome into the studio Mr. Kofi Abotsi, Dean of the Faculty of Law at the GIMPA School of Law. Sir, you're welcome.
Thank you.
What are your own perspectives about the controversy that is developing between the African Union and the International Criminal Court?
Well, first of all, I just need to say that whatever I say is not representative of the GIMPA position, or the government of Ghana for that matter. So I speak purely from the perspective of an academic and someone who has been following the coursework. I think that the confusion has arisen largely as a result of misunderstandings. In some ways, there has been communication gaps between the court and its constituents over the years. And naturally, courts don't really engage constituents. I mean, courts are there to administer justice. So their job is not really to engage in any democratic explanation of what they do. However, justice survives a lot on perceptions. And that is why we are extremely excited, particularly, that the Honorable Prosecutor has actually accepted to do this. And in today's meeting, she was very open in engaging with the public and was very happy to answer questions. This exercise and initiative is exactly what the court needs to build trust, to build a certain level of consensus so that people do not see the court as having an agenda, and so that the skepticism can be beaten down. But from the perspective of someone who has followed the court, to the best of my own knowledge, I think that the suspicions, the skepticism, and all the confusion surrounding the court's work is as a result of a certain communication gap as opposed to a really deliberate act on the part of the courts. Not to mention, of course, the fact that some of the criticisms are also appear to be opportunistic. They also appear to be opportunistic by certain constituents. But those are matters that can be left to our respective suspicions and speculations. Generally, however, I think a lot is built on ignorance.
What are some of the misinformation and problems with conception and so on? What are some of these issues?
Well, I listened to the earlier discussion. A lot has to do with the perception of the case selection process, that apparently there's a certain target of Africans because people think that only Africans have been prosecuted so far. It's very easy for many constituents in Africa to build suspicions on the grounds of neo-colonialism, which has always been the perception that the rest of the world is interested in colonizing Africa all over again. And they use instruments like the court. All these are perceptions people have. But one thing which I think is important and which may not have been interrogated in the entire discussion has to do with the fact that if Africa appears to be the only continent that consistently gets to have its people prosecuted, could we ask possibly why and whether there's something in the operational system of the courts that seems to lend support to this? And the reason I say this is this. One of the key principles of the court is the principle of complementarity. Complementarity has to do with the fact that the courts will not ordinarily take over, and I think the prosecutor mentioned that, until your domestic system appears either unwilling or unable to do it. So the court will not come in until there's a reason to come in. So there's an initial deferral to the national system, and if the national system fails, the court will come in. So the court complements. So what it means is that the justice system survives on a certain complementary arrangement. Now, part of the reason why Africa may appear to be in the focal point, as far as this is concerned, is possibly the fact that the domestic systems consistently show an unwillingness to engage in prosecution. And I think, we can be angry, we can be emotional, but they are realities. Go back into the 90s. All these atrocities that were committed through civil wars, the genocides, in countries that we don't have to mention because we all know. Mention to me one instance in which there was a clear use of the domestic system that ultimately led to justice being meted out or done to the victims and the perpetrators of all these.
So do you honestly believe what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Absolutely?
Yes.
Do you believe that the system in the United States of America is willing and ready to try George Bush for the crimes against humanity committed in Iraq? Do you believe that?
Well, first of all, the U.S. is not a party to this. There's politics and there's law.
But there's a mechanism for bringing non-state parties to the ICC. There's a mechanism.
No, absolutely, there's a mechanism.
Yes.
And there's no doubt about that. But you mentioned also the fact that these members are members of the Security Council, etc. Don't we also forget the fact that there's a geopolitical difficulty sometimes in some of these arrangements and in the world overall? These courts ultimately, usually, are designed for the world, generally speaking. We can also tell that if you look at these countries, the reality is that these countries normally have internal mechanisms that work and that can bring accountability to their people. The examples you gave, and I listened to you earlier, you mentioned Afghanistan. 1 second.
The British scientists who gave information to British journalists indicating that Tony Blair lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq was murdered. Has there been justice? Has anybody been tried? What has happened? Was
murdered, and there's a preponderance of evidence pointing to the fact that he was murdered by the British authorities.
The report of the Committee of Inquiry has not even been made public.
Okay, but the point I'm making...
Compare that to the African situation.
The point I'm making is that there's a reality to all these things. Just look at the Americans, just look at the Europeans, and just look generally, Africa in comparative terms. How often have we had mass atrocities perpetrated against citizens of a particular country? So, the example, Britain perpetrating atrocities against its own people. The US perpetrating atrocities against its own people. Usually this doesn't happen. The examples you gave about war crimes, among others, these were at best atrocities against other people. But we're dealing with situations
Should that matter?
No, it doesn't.
Should that matter whether the atrocities against your own people or against other people?
It doesn't, but remember we're dealing with inability or unwillingness. And usually these things happen when you have atrocities perpetrated against your own people, but because of the political establishment, you are in office and there's a victor's justice. So in the case of civil wars, once you successfully become the leader of the country, all the perpetration of atrocity is forgiven or forgotten because you're in power. That victor's justice and that impunity, which is often perpetrated, we have to be realistic about this. Africa is, substantially the culprit. if you should look at countries generally speaking, these issues of war crimes that have been perpetrated in other countries, the Balkans, there was a special court that was set for the ICTY that was specially set for the Balkans. There was an ICTR that was set for Rwanda. And there were special courts that was set for Sierra Leone. Now look at all these instances in Africa. Where there was no special court set, there was no justice. It's as simple as that. The example you gave about Afghanistan, among others, truly these are examples that could be given in comparative terms. But we're also dealing with countries that are not members. There could be references. There are Security Council blockades. And we all know that the geopolitics sometimes gets played in and tends to obstruct some of these justice initiatives. So I'm not saying that there are no difficulties, and I'm not sure the prosecutor is also not saying that there are no difficulties in terms of its work overall. But the reality is this: an offense doesn't get converted into a proper behavior simply by reason of the fact that a particular person is tried for that, but another is not tried for it. In domestic legal systems, not all cases of criminal offenses are tried. Some are tried, others are not tried. Some are not tried even because of simple difficulties such as gathering evidence, among others.
Was the ICC not meant to elevate us from that level to a level where we are all equal before the law?
Absolutely.
So how come that we can say that this is how it has been and therefore is justified?
But it hasn't said that. The ICC hasn't said that to the best of my
knowledge. No, I'm not talking about
anyway.
the ICC. I'm talking about the argument you made. No,
the point I'm making is that, first of all, the ICC was established only in 2000 or,
it became effective 2002.
Correct, 2002. We're dealing with 14 or so years. In the lifespan of the court, in terms of what is done, the ICC has become a veritable part of the international landscape as far as criminal justice is concerned. So it's done a lot. There are difficulties. It has just opened investigations into Georgia also. Clearly, there are moves to ensure that this perceived concentration on Africa is a fallacy. But I'm just saying that the perceived...
It's a reality now. There are moves to ensure that it changes.
No. The reality, see, let's not forget this. There may be a reality that may coincide with a certain perception. It's a reality which is coinciding with the perception, and the perception is all the atrocities that has been investigated, either by references from the countries involved or in the 1 or 2 cases from the Security Council. All these instances happen to be in Africa. Let's also do a map. Let me finish 1 second. Let's also do a map of the civil wars across the world from the 2000s till today, and the instances of mass atrocities, very often perpetrated by governments against their own people, especially in electoral context, in some cases civil war context. Let's do a map. And you will realize that the preponderance of these were also in Africa.
It's not true.
It is true.
Have you looked at Latin America?
No. I challenge you on that.
I challenge you on that too. Have you
Which
looked at
cases
Latin
are we talking
America?
about? Which cases?
In any case,
yes.
are you going to say that reference from La Côte d'Ivoire to the ICC of former President Gbagbo is also reference from a country? Are you going to say that?
Absolutely.
On what basis? Is that not a case of victor's justice?
No, it wasn't victor's justice. The reference of Côte d'Ivoire. Côte d'Ivoire wasn't made by the Security
Alassane
Council.
Ouattara, President Alassane Ouattara,
right,
was part of that war. He was a war leader. He mobilized rebels to attack the national army.
But Alassane Ouattara is the president effective of Côte d'Ivoire.
So the fact that he's the president, Victor, means that he can get justice and others cannot get justice.
With respect, maybe you were not there this morning, and so let me put things in context.
I was there throughout.
Oh, you were. Then it's important that I remind you of things and put things in context. The point is this: the Ivorian scenario, and there were questions asked in that respect. The Ivorian scenario is a developing scenario, to the best of my knowledge. And I do not sit here speaking for the court, but I speak on, and I'm speaking of things that we've all been made aware of. The Ivorian scenario is an evolving scenario. There are people who have been brought before the court. The people who have been brought, or the person who has been brought before the court, has been brought before the court because the circumstances, the evidence, and the feasibility of the prosecution have all come together, which has made it necessary for the moment. It doesn't mean others are not being brought. And by the way, people were not arrested because they were Gbagbo or they were
They
Ouattara.
haven't been brought.
Yes.
The reality is that they haven't been brought.
Right, but the investigation is ongoing.
Others have been brought.
Yes, but there are investigations ongoing. The court has a process. The thing is, the legal system functions in a certain way, and that way is a structured, coherent, evolving way. So things just don't develop in a day. It's important for us to remember. It's very easy, and in Ghana, and everywhere in the world, when you have conflict that arise out of politics, and I think you and I are aware, because we are both in this country, every action, every step that is taken by any prosecutor, any professional, will be given a political coloration. It's as simple as that. And I suspect that's the Ivorian scenario. Any move that is made, one camp is going to interpret it in the political light and spectrum, and that will create a problem. So I'm not surprised that the discussion is being made in the context of one camp or the other. I don't even want to mention names. But clearly, I do believe that as professionalized as the court is, and sometimes we should ask ourselves, what is the incentive for the court to want to be factionalized? I can't see a single incentive. What is the incentive for the court to decide that I support one camp and I don't support the other camp? What is the incentive?
We are not talking about incentives.
No, it's important.
We are talking about defective law
it's important.
and defective structures.
No.
It's not about incentives.
No. If you are talking of defective structures, then let the argument be directed in the angle of suggesting corrections. Corrections that will help you overcome those defects. But the argument of neocolonialism...
First of all, you have to admit the defect.
No, can I finish?
You have to admit the defect.
Can I finish? You can't speak of neocolonialism without speaking of incentive.
I've not mentioned neocolonialism.
But the preponderance of the critic has been about neocolonialism, Western agenda.
Can we address the issues that we are discussing here and now?
Kwesi, it's very difficult for me to ignore those things. Because let me say one thing. I'm not surprised about the critics of the ICC. And I'm organizing a conference, so I don't want it to come across as if we even have a position. We don't. The people who stand to benefit from the critics are the actors who are likely to become the victim, who are likely to become... That is the truth.
I mean, in this conference, there have been people who have been critical of the ICC, who come from civil society, who are students and so on,
Correct.
who are not presidents,
and they are those who are
not
campaigning.
ministers.
But they are those who are campaigning on the back of the neocolonialist argument. If you speak of being neocolonized, if you speak of an agenda being imposed upon you, then the one imposing the agenda must have an incentive. The incentive could be exploitation. The incentive could be using you. The incentive could be creating a facade of an impression. What is the incentive? What is the incentive of the West of getting African leaders in jail, for example? There will be a new set of leaders.
It's not all African leaders who are going to jail.
So what is the incentive? And I don't see that. And that is why it's so difficult for me to agree with this argument of there being a hidden agenda. There must be an incentive. And I can't see what the incentive is. If somebody is going to arrest an African leader because he's not going to allow a certain investment, I can understand that. If somebody wants to arrest an African leader because
have you read the Cheney report, which was sent to President Bush in 2001 about American energy needs? Have you read the Cheney report?
And that mentioned the ICC?
Have you read the Cheney report?
I haven't read the report. What do I have to...
Try and read it.
In this respect, I think we are speaking to an audience who must understand. We shouldn't distort this. What would the Cheney report say, which will give an incentive for an ICC?
The Cheney report talks about the need for America to establish its hegemony in West Africa because of American increasing interest in West African oil, for example.
Good. And the ICC...
And it's very clear, it's in black and white.
And the ICC could have been blocked by Russia if there's an American agenda behind the ICC. The ICC could have been blocked by China, could have been blocked by all these countries whose geopolitical dynamics are almost invariably antithetical to the Americans.
Is that not a problem?
So
that not a problem?
So how come the ICC
doesn't that introduce
but it creates an incompatibility?
Doesn't that introduce geopolitics into what should be judicial and legal? Doesn't that introduce geopolitics into it?
First of all, everything I have said creates a logical inconsistency with what you are saying. However, the other argument is this, and we can't discount that. Every African who is a member of the ICC signed. The ICC is a voluntary union, and countries sign up to it or opt out of it. All these references we are speaking about, which have become controversial, they were references by these countries. And don't let us speak of actors, because ultimately when there's a reference by a state, that reference binds the state. Forget who is the president. So you have signed up to a state arrangement. Your people have been sent there. You made a reference yourself. And then we still speak of being recolonized, or there's a certain agenda.
I have not spoken about recolonization.
I live in a country where every election, and
there's
one coming up, creates tensions that makes you and I get worried. I guarantee you that some elections in Africa haven't gone chaotic and haven't had people killing each other because these leaders remember that there's an ICC. I think that the ICC,
Or,
you and I do
or
have...
that they've not been instigated by external powers, so to
Well,
do.
there's a lot of suspicion in your mind, I think. But we can all have suspicions. Unfortunately, there must be basis.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Well, viewers, we've heard Mr. Kofi Abotsi, Dean of the Faculty of Law of the GIMPA School of Law. Earlier, we heard the Chief Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court. You are the best judges. But please don't forget that the best comes to you from TV3. Please stay with us until we meet again next week.